The Acadian Exile, or the Expulsion of the Acadians, was a tragic event that occurred during the mid-18th century, particularly between 1755 and 1763, where thousands of Acadians, French settlers in the Maritime provinces of Canada, were forcibly removed from their homes by the British authorities. The reasons behind the exile are complex, intertwined with the ongoing imperial struggle between the British and French empires. The Acadians, who were primarily neutral and sought to avoid conflict, found themselves caught in a web of geopolitical maneuvering that had devastating consequences for them and for future generations. To understand the exile of the Acadians, one must first explore the concept of neutrality and the political climate that led to the event. The Acadians were French-speaking settlers who arrived in what is now the Canadian Maritimes, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island, in the early 17th century. Over time, they developed a distinct culture and identity rooted in French Catholicism and agricultural practices. Despite their French origins, the Acadians remained largely neutral during the ongoing conflict between France and Britain, preferring not to engage in the hostilities that defined the era. However, as British and French imperial interests clashed in North America, the Acadians' neutrality became increasingly problematic. By the mid-18th century, Britain had gained control over much of Canada and sought to consolidate its holdings, while France was determined to maintain its influence. The British feared that the Acadians, although neutral, might assist the French if war broke out. This concern was exacerbated by the fact that many Acadians had maintained strong cultural and familial ties to France, which led the British authorities to view them as a potential security threat. The actual event of the expulsion began in earnest in 1755, when the British authorities, led by Lieutenant Governor Charles Lawrence of Nova Scotia, made the decision to forcibly remove the Acadians. The British strategy was partly motivated by a desire to secure the region from French influence, particularly during the height of the 7 Years' War. Acadians were asked to swear an oath of allegiance to the British Crown, but many refused, as they had previously made an oath of neutrality. The refusal to swear allegiance to Britain became a key pretext for their expulsion. On July 28, 1755, British forces began rounding up Acadians from their homes. The plan was to deport them to various English colonies in North America, though many ended up in the American colonies, where they faced further hardships. This forced removal was brutal and deeply traumatic. Families were separated, homes were burned, and entire communities were destroyed. The Acadian population of Nova Scotia was scattered across the British Atlantic colonies, with thousands being sent to the colonies of Massachusetts, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and Maryland, while others were sent to the Caribbean or to England. The expulsion was not a singular event, but a process that unfolded over several years. Between 1755 and 1763, an estimated 10,000 Acadians were deported. The conditions of their exile were dire. Many Acadians faced terrible overcrowding aboard ships, poor nutrition, and lack of proper sanitation, which led to numerous deaths. Once they arrived in the American colonies, they found themselves in a hostile environment, facing discrimination, poverty, and a lack of support. Many of the Acadians were forced to live in makeshift conditions and had to rely on the charity of strangers. The exile also involved significant cultural loss. The Acadians were torn from their homes and their agricultural livelihoods. The forced relocation disrupted their tight-knit communities and fractured the Acadian way of life. The trauma of displacement, compounded by the death of family members and the separation from loved ones, had a profound psychological effect on the Acadians. The Acadians who survived often struggled with their sense of identity and belonging, as they were cut off from their French heritage and forced to adapt to new cultures. While some Acadians were eventually allowed to return to their homeland after the Treaty of Paris in 1763, many were unable to return to their previous landholdings. The British authorities had confiscated Acadian lands, redistributing them to English settlers, which meant that many Acadians were displaced permanently. For those who did return, the rebuilding process was long and difficult. The Acadians who had survived the expulsion were left to rebuild their communities, often with limited resources and facing continued British suspicion. The psychological scars of the exile persisted for generations. The trauma of the expulsion remained a central feature of Acadian collective memory, and many Acadians today view the expulsion as a formative event in their history. This event helped shape the identity of the Acadian people, who would later embrace the term Cajun in Louisiana and cultivate a distinctive culture that blended French, Indigenous, and American influences. Additionally, the expulsion of the Acadians had a lasting impact on Acadian Creole relations in Louisiana, where many Acadian refugees settled. The Acadians brought their French language, Catholicism, and agricultural practices with them, significantly influencing the region's culture. The word Cajun itself is derived from the term Acadian, and today Cajun culture continues to thrive in Louisiana, a reminder of the enduring legacy of the Acadian people. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the Acadian community began to rebuild its identity and cultural heritage. The Acadian Renaissance in the late 19th century led to a resurgence of interest in Acadian history, language, and traditions. Efforts were made to preserve the Acadian French language and to commemorate the hardships endured by their ancestors. This included the establishment of monuments and the celebration of National Acadian Day, August 15th, a day of remembrance for the Acadian people. In more recent years, efforts have been made at the governmental and cultural level to reconcile with the descendants of the expelled Acadians. A formal apology for the expulsion was issued by Prime Minister Stephen Harper of Canada in 2003, acknowledging the pain and suffering caused by the event and the negative impacts it had on Acadian communities. The apology represented a step toward healing, recognizing the wrongs done to the Acadian people and their enduring spirit of resilience. The exile of the Acadian neutrals in the 18th century was a pivotal event in the history of Canada and the broader Atlantic world. It was a tragic episode in which thousands of innocent people were displaced, leading to widespread suffering, loss, and disruption of cultural identity. The trauma of the expulsion affected not only the immediate victims, but also their descendants, shaping the cultural landscape of North America. However, through resilience and the preservation of their heritage, the Acadian people have remained a vital part of Canadian society, demonstrating the enduring strength of cultural identity even in the face of hardship. The effects of the exile continue to be felt today, with the Acadian people standing as a testament to survival, remembrance, and the ongoing process of reconciliation.